At 21, Tabby Ryan, the author of the book Give, moved from Australia to a remote village to teach high school operated by a charity, the Christadelphian charity, Agape in Action. She's written a book called Give, and the narrative explores the stark contrast between her privileged upbringing here in Australia and in Adelaide versus the extreme poverty faced by her students and neighbours. Throughout the book, Tabby tells details of physical and emotional challenges of adapting to the new culture, including contracting malaria and navigating the complexities of the local education system. Ultimately, the story highlights the profound impact of child sponsorship and the resilience of the human spirit in the face of systematic hardship. Her account serves as a personal reflection on the responsibilities of those with wealth to assist the less fortunate. And Tabby always keeps the gospel message in mind. It's her ultimate goal. Tabby Ryan lives in Adelaide and is a member of the Mt Barker Christadelphian Church or ecclesia. The book entitled Give is a paperback of 151 pages. It's available from the Christadelphian Scripture Study Service. That's www.cSS.org. And all proceeds of this book are donated to Agape in Action. We're thrilled to have Tabby join us on Wilderness Conversations. Tabby, thanks very much for joining Wilderness Conversations.
Thanks for having me.
I want to get into the story which you've written in the book Give in a second, but let's just go back to the beginning. Tell us a little bit about yourself and how you came to find the gospel message.
So I grew up in Adelaide, South Australia. My parents sort of came across the gospel when they were teenagers. So Dad had been brought up Catholic and Mum's family didn't really have a religious background. And a colleague of Dad's was a Christadelphian, and they sort of were probably, not the most typical teenagers or early 20s. They were really interested in exploring and learning about the Bible and what the teachings were. And so they both got baptised. So I guess the extended family wasn't Christadelphian, but we grew up, in a Christadelphian household. But I think one of the things that I really appreciated was Mum and Dad were very keen on us making decisions ourselves. And I remember really clearly Dad saying, don't believe this is true because I'm telling you. You need to sort of seek this out yourself. And I think I took that on and really appreciated that perspective of things, of making sure that you do something because you truly believe it's right, rather than because someone is telling you to.
And you got baptised and you came to an age where you started looking outside of Australia for stuff to do, as it were. And I think you did mission work and went to places before this actual event. Yeah.
I was always really keen to travel and to see more of the world. I had a bucket list, of 101 things to do as a teenager, and that was sort of kick-started the travel bug, I guess. But I also had a real strong drive to do something to help people in need. And at that point in my life, I wasn't sort of aware of the needs in Australia and felt a really strong pull to helping people in extreme poverty, I guess, even though I guess I was relatively young myself, but was quite connected to the work of Agape in Action and really, felt that drive to go overseas and help out, I guess.
What made you write the book that you've written recently?
Good question. Actually, the book that I just published, at the end of last year was in bulk written in 2014. So I was living in Kenya at the time and I had been keeping a blog and keeping journals. And James Flint from Agape in Action came over on a trip and he said, Tabby, you need to write a book. And so I had started compiling it 10 years ago, and then it just was one of those things that just went on the back burner. And I think I wrestled myself with how to make sense of everything that had happened and how to tie it into a format that was palatable for people to be able to just pick up and read. Sort of tied myself in lots of knots and took a long time to actually put it together. But, yeah, once I realised, hey, it's going to be 10 years, I was like, okay, that's the mark. I have to get it done.
Now or never sort of thing.
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
I'll say, I don't know how to say this. I'll just go out and say it. I didn't think I was going to enjoy it. It's just not the sort of book I think I'd read.
Right, yeah,
but it was actually I was pleasantly surprised. It's actually, so I'll say it, because for those who are thinking it's probably mightn't be their cup of tea, it's actually really easy to read, and I think you've done a great job in the way you have compiled it and put it together. Really easy to read, and it makes a lot of sense, so I recommend it.
Oh, thank you. That's very kind, yeah.
Well, you were 21 years old and you shipped out from Australia, where you had a very good life, and to all intents and purposes, any logical person would have said, just stay in Australia, but you didn't. You headed off to Kenya.
Yes.
What drove you? Why did you make that decision? And tell us a little bit about some of those early days.
Yeah, I guess I had, and I unpack this in a bit more detail in the book, I just sort of felt like there was a bit of a gap between what I believed and what I said I believed and how I acted. And I'm a big believer in values-driven living, and living according to your values. And if there is a misalignment, calling that out and doing something about it. And so I guess I'd been through a bit of a process of being like, okay, what does it mean to live a life of service to others? What does it mean to really give and serve? And I had found at that point in time, in an Australian context, when I was doing that, I was actually getting a lot of benefit from it. So, you help someone and they help you back. And so I sort of felt I'm not really giving up anything. I'm not really, struggling or suffering. I haven't really had any trials. And I think I was talking with someone and had mentioned about, I haven't really had any big trials in my life. And they were saying, well, is that because you're not inviting them, like because you're being so protective? And I thought, well, exactly as you said, I live a really privileged life. Maybe it's the fact that I'm so protective against it. So I guess it was a bit of a tricky thing to do as a 21-year-old to just relocate to Africa. And there was a little bit of resistance from some people of, like you say, it doesn't make sense. What are you doing? But I had just graduated from uni and I had a teaching degree and a health degree, and I felt sort of armed to go in and do something with it.
Change the world.
Yeah, exactly. That beautiful, naive, but so passionate.
What did your mum and dad think?
They were supportive but concerned, I would say. So, that they hadn't travelled particularly, and maybe that was a good thing. They didn't really have a huge awareness of what the challenges or circumstances might be like. But they were very, very supportive and always have been of, you do what you think is right.
Yeah. Well, you're 21 years old and you head off and you arrive in Kenya. Tell us about arriving in Kenya. What were your first impressions and what were some of those very early experiences?
Yeah, Kenya is very different to Adelaide and Nairobi. It's a real big, bustling, chaotic city. When I first went there, I didn't speak much Swahili at all, which is fine. English is also their national language, so, you can get by with English, but there's just a lot of differences in just about everything. So Agape had very sensibly said to me, if you want to go there for a year, you need to do a short visit first. So the year before I'd gone over for a couple of weeks.
Okay.
And just, got used to a little bit of what it was like, or knew a little bit what to expect. And
did you go with other people when you did that?
I went by myself, but I met a girl from Canada when I when I got to Nairobi, yeah. So, yeah, it's just that kind of culture shock of there's crazy traffic and there's people, yelling and tooting and then sort of, there's a bunch of guys with guns, like just a lot of those things that you wouldn't see in an Australian context. And I remember I'd hired a driver and he sort of midway through the drive was like, I'm feeling sleepy, you can drive now. Which, like in an Australian context, if you pay a driver to drive you from A to B, they absolutely do that. But things are a bit more fluid in Kenya. And so I was sort of at the wheel driving and being like, oh, my goodness, that's a goat in front of me. I better stop the car. Like, just a very different scene to an Adelaide context, yeah.
You described it as losing touch with reality when you arrived at the airport.
It did feel a bit like that, yeah. It was kind of like, I have a very vivid imagination and I dream really vividly every night. And so part of it was kind of like, is this a dream or is this real? No, this is real. Like,
well, you had an extraordinary experience when you first arrived, and you talk about the disappearance of Priscilla, one of the students.
Yeah, that was quite early on. It was just a real wake-up call and that kind of thing then continued to happen over the, years that I spent there. But I think that was my first instance. So when I'd visited previously, I had taken a bunch of photos and I thought that would be a nice way to make some contact with the young people that were on site. And I pulled out the photos and was showing them and, you know, had the photos to give to the young people. And one of them just sort of pointed at the photo and she was like, oh, Priscilla, yeah, she disappeared. And then moves on to the next photo. And for me, it's like, well, hang on, what do you mean? You know, teenage girl can't disappear, and has there been an investigation and what's happening? But for them, that was just a much more normal thing. And I did sort of ask further questions, and they said, like, it's possible that she's just moved to live with some other family, or it's possible that something really bad has happened and it's not up to us. It's just that sort of acceptance of a lot more suffering and challenge in life and willingness to just, we move on.
Very sober.
Yeah, it was quite sobering. Yeah.
Did you go with the intention of teaching or preaching, or what was sort of the mission for you?
I think the overall mission was to sort of live like Jesus, so to serve, and I was quite flexible in what that looked like. So I was thinking, yes, I've got a health degree and a teaching degree. I want to help out in that way, but I also, you know, I'm more than happy to teach Sunday school or to do sisters classes, or, you know, I can tell people about Jesus. But I think for me, the best and the way that resonates most for me is to show that. And so that was kind of what my mission was. I also felt that because I had such good connections with so many resources, I would be a good sort of mouthpiece. So when someone was struggling, or when there was a cause that I could see a need for, I could just write a blog and get some support. Yep. Or, you know, make things happen that, you know, it's that idea of one person can't change the world, but you can change the world for one person. And I wanted to find as many of those one people that I could help and change the world for.
Well, you did end up teaching. Did you jump straight into that, or was that sort of more of a progression?
I was like fresh out of uni. So I'd done a lot of teaching placements, but I certainly wasn't an experienced teacher. And I was homeschooled, so I'd never been to school. So that was probably a lot more of a challenge than I had anticipated. The Kenyan curriculum is very rigid, and they have, you know, lots of subjects that they teach in great detail. And so I found I was having to learn the content sort of the night before and then teach it, because it was rote learning and they had to, you know, learn exactly as the textbook said. So I ended up using quite a lot of brain space on that. And so I initially was, you know, full-time teaching, but as the time wore on, I sort of realised I'm more useful in some other ways.
Right, okay.
Back my teaching load a little bit.
So, well, you mentioned you arrived there and you had a driver to take you where you were going. How did all this come about? And like, you arrive and like where were you staying, and how did you plan all that, and how did you know what you were doing? Just turning up.
Yeah, it's a lot of logistics and a lot of uncertainty.
Yeah.
So I was with Agape in Action, and so they had organised, you know, helped me organise a driver and you know, the place where I was going to be staying. There was actually a house that was built on site at the school. So my role for the year was to go to the high school in Western Kenya,
okay,
and to be teaching there for the year. That was sort of the remit.
So that was the sort of focus of the trip.
Yeah, and to be like an on-site field worker at the high school. So there was a house at the high school where I would be staying, and there was some other volunteers that were going to be coming in and out as well throughout that time. So you have the plan, but then in Kenya everything runs on Kenyan time and things are a bit different. So I sort of got to the school and then there was nothing happening, and it was sort of like, are we starting teaching? It's not the same as Australia in that, you know, on June 28 we start at 9 a.m. People sort of trickled in for a week and there was a lot of uncertainty, and then suddenly it's on and you're like, oh, I have to be in class at 7 a.m. Yeah.
Is it a private school or a public school? And did you have any trouble sort of getting the permission to teach? You know, you just show up as an Australian and say, I'm a teacher. Is that okay, or how does that work? Yeah,
it's actually not okay. They're very strict on internationals not taking local jobs.
Okay, yeah. Despite the fact that obviously you're a real treasure to have there, but they've got this rule, Yeah,
so it was a little bit tricky. It was lots of meetings at different departments in Nairobi, trying to get a teaching permit, which I actually ended up getting my official teaching permit. I think it was the week after I'd actually left. So I'd been there teaching for a year.
Right.
And then came back to Australia and got it. And I mean, I did go back and forth for 5 more years, so it was still useful. But yeah, that's kind of indicative of the time frames of things there. And I was there as a volunteer, so, you know, even being there as a volunteer, they would view that as, well, if you weren't there, you would be paying a local teacher. So how are we making sure we're not just taking their jobs?
Yeah, okay. You tell the story of arriving and breaking the ice, as it were, by introducing yourself or speaking to the congregation and calling them chickens and sisters.
Yes, that was I had put a fair bit of effort into learning a little bit of Swahili, but
not enough effort, apparently.
Yeah, not enough at the words that sound really similar. So, you know, cuckoo and doodle sound very similar in my mind. And
they both sound a bit chickenish.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, cuckoo is the word for chicken, which makes sense. But, yeah, I think when you're standing at the front of a room.
So what's the word for chicken and then the word for brethren?
The word for chicken is cuckoo, whereas the word for sisters is...
sisters.
Yeah. So the words that we would normally say is habari asubuhi ndugu na madada, which is brothers and sisters. Ndugu, which I got muddled with the word cuckoo. So I said habari cuckoo na madada. So, yeah, it was everyone just erupted and I was like, whoa, this is such a hit. Like, they love me. And then I was looking at my translator like, why is he laughing so much?
Good icebreaker.
Yeah, exactly. And Kenyans do have a really good appreciation of humour and they love a laugh. Yeah.
That's interesting. You talk about the extreme poverty and the extreme trials they go through in their life, and yet humour is still a very, very big part of their life. Yes,
and humour is a big part of my life. I find that's, you know, often the best way to deal with a really challenging situation. And so for it to be something like, you know, any little slapstick humour or, you know, light joke. I mean, puns fell a little bit to the floor because they didn't quite understand the language stuff, but anything like slapstick or, you know, self-deprecating, they would lose it. They love that kind of humour. So it is a nice thing that in the midst of a really chaotic situation, you can find a reason to laugh.
Interesting, isn't it?
Yeah.
Crosses all cultures.
Yeah, certainly does, yeah.
You mentioned in the book, and there's a chapter on sort of starting in the school role, that the students crave education as a way out of poverty. How has that sort of changed your view on education and the way we view education in Australia?
I think it is just a real cultural difference in that setting in Kenya. You know, you do need to, education is your way out of poverty, whereas in Australia we're not in poverty, and so sometimes for a lot of people education is just a pain. Certainly, you know, in the schools that I was working at in like northern Adelaide suburbs, there were a lot of young people there who didn't want to be there, and the goal of their day was just to annoy the teachers as much as they could. And, you know, one of the schools I worked at in Adelaide actually had on-site security guards because sometimes the students would get quite volatile. So going from that to then in this setting where the students are so keen to learn that they're, you know, getting to the class at night time while it's still dark, and they're like poring over their books and coming into, I ran the library while I was there, and the library would be packed after school, everyone just desperately trying to study, because for them it really is like the ticket out. And I think there's a lot more awareness of the struggles, like the privilege of getting an education. A lot of young people wouldn't have that opportunity, whereas the school I was working at was predominantly sponsored students. So they were from families of extreme poverty, and someone was paying for their education, you know, someone from Australia or Canada or, you know, America.
So sort of mainly sponsored by Christian organisations?
Yeah, yep. So all the whole high school was funded by Agape.
Oh, so it is all Agape, the Agape charity.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Can you paint the picture of the school? I can't really imagine it. So are we talking about kids from sort of 5 through to 15? How are they dressed? How does it all work? Tell us a little bit about it. I just can't picture it.
Yeah, okay, yeah. So to paint a picture, the school that I was working at was a high school, so it was equivalent of year 8 to year 12. But having said that, you know, there was a primary school just next door, and there's just kids everywhere in Kenya. So they're you know, coming out of the bushes left, right and centre. So there was always lots of young people around. But because they take education quite seriously, they were very strict on some things like uniform. So everyone had to have perfect uniform every day, which they would only get issued one uniform. So they would, you know, have to take good care of it and try and, you know, they had the right black school shoes and long socks and skirts and ironed shirt.
So quite formal, really.
Quite formal, yeah. And it's kind of juxtaposed against the fact that there's like muddy fields, and it's in the middle of a quite regional setting. There's farms all around, and then everyone's in shirt and tie. I remember one lesson on a Monday I was teaching, and everyone was seemed to be falling asleep. And I said, "All right, let's go for a run around the oval. Just wake everyone up." And they're normally really obedient to whatever the teacher says, but they were really reluctant. I was like, "What's going on?" And one of the lads said to me, "Oh, madam, it's Monday." I was like, "Yeah." He's like, "Well, our uniforms, like we've washed them, and so we don't want to go for a run because they'll get sweaty."
And we've got to wear them the whole week.
Yes, they've got to wear them the whole week. They don't have that much washing powder. They don't have that much water. So to be asked to go for a run around the oval, they all wanted to obey me, but they also had this real practical. There were so many things like that it was like a real light bulb of, they're struggling with something I hadn't even had on my radar.
Fascinating. And you mentioned, I think in the book you called the timetable dizzying. Is that because it was just so full on? And like, are you talking about the hours or the intensity? In what way was it like that?
Yeah, I guess both. Like the schedule was really full on. They would be in class from 7 a.m. to 5 p.m. And it was based on a lot of good intention, but probably not the most recent research in terms of like attention spans and processing of information and stuff. It was sort of like old school rote learning, long hours kind of style education, but also very analog. So even just scheduling the timetable for 12 different subjects with this many time slots per day, it was done by pen and paper. And then you notice a clash and rub it out and try and fit another class in there. So like it was dizzying in terms of the intensity of the timetable, but also like the inaccuracies and the complications of being in a very analog world.
It must have been exhausting. I mean, such a long day, and then you're planning lessons and all sorts of other things as well.
Yeah, for me, the planning and prep also took a long time, but I also took on a few extra tasks. So I was running the school library, so every day after school I'd have that open. And then what ended up being a big part of my role was what started as a first aid station and sort of ended up developing into a little health clinic. By the end of the time there, I, was dealing with a lot of medical situations, which, like, I had a health degree, but I was no doctor or medic. But just my awareness from being brought up in Australia was higher than the locals. And so, I would quite often send photos or videos to my brother-in-law who's a doctor and be like, "Help, what do I do with this?" He would sort of point me in the right direction.
One of your chapters was called Madam Doctor.
Right, yeah.
You set up this health clinic, so you effectively become the sort of first port of call, or sort of triage for any injuries or troubles that people have got.
Yes, and one thing that I hadn't really appreciated was because I was providing the services free, a lot of people, that was attractive for a lot of people. So the plan had initially just been, like a school first aid, Band-Aid if you need, I don't know if you've got a headache, but it ended up, becoming a lot bigger and people from the village were sort of coming. The volunteers the year before I was there, one of the lady there was a nurse, so she had sort of started that process, and then it just sort of fleshed out and became quite a large part of my role. Sometimes it was treating and doing things myself, but also I had access to a vehicle and I had access to funds. So sometimes it was getting people to hospital or to, further health services. And
you saw some pretty horrendous injuries along the way as well, which would have been a bit of a shock.
Absolutely, yeah. I remember actually when I came back to Australia, I was doing like a first aid refresher course. And the poor trainer, he was going through all the different things, and every situation that he presented, I would have a question and an example.
Right.
And then he got to midway through and he was like, "Sorry, I just have to stop. Where on earth do you work?" Like every situation was, just a bit hectic. But an Australian first aid course doesn't cover, some of the situations that you have in Kenya. Like I remember one particularly horrific one was a young person whose grandma had been chopping down a bunch of bananas with a machete, and the kid had gotten in the way and she just sliced his head, and he came to my clinic and I was like, "Oh my goodness, I can see things I shouldn't see inside someone's head."
So what is that, just bandage it up and go to hospital?
In that case we did, we steri-stripped because we were able to sort of clean it out and patch it up and then bandage it.
Wow.
But
amazing.
Some cases we're rushing to hospital instead. Yeah.
You talk about some of the challenges in a place like Kenya. You encounter many people that have got various challenges and diseases. Tell us about some of those experiences. And you talk about a jigger infested. What's that?
Yeah, that was a big learning for me as well, actually. There was a particular situation I was involved in for several months, and there was a lady who was she would come along on Sundays and we would see her around the place, and she was quite significantly disabled, like physically and mentally. So she walked in sort of a loping way, and a few locals told me that she couldn't actually communicate, but she communicated really well non-verbally with me. Like she had, a big, beautiful smile, and she would gesture and explain things. And I actually found one of my students in my English class was just this really beautiful girl who was very patient, and I actually used her to come along with me one time to chat with this lady, and she found that she could speak the mother tongue. She didn't have very good Swahili or English, but she could speak the mother tongue, but with a sort of drawl. So, this student was able to help out with the translation. And this lady had a young son. She had been raped 2 years earlier. And so she had this 2-year-old son who she was sort of looking after. And I just had them on my radar because they seemed really needy. And then one of the days when I was playing with the son, I just noticed all these little blisters on his hands, and then saw the blisters were on his feet as well. And I showed a local nurse because I was confused. I hadn't seen anything like it. It wasn't quite a burn, but, and she was straight away, oh, that's jiggers, and then sort of didn't tell me a whole lot more. And so when I went home and researched it, and it was associated with a lot of stigma, and basically it's like this little flea thing that lives in the real, like the most poverty-stricken places, real dirty, dusty sort of environments. And the jiggers kind of get under your skin and like lay their eggs.
Oh, wow.
The eggs will hatch and they eat away. They're basically born into this delicious world of someone's foot or fingernails.
So you get all infected and...
Yes,
right.
And they eat their way out. So they're very painful and very itchy and just awful, and they're quite difficult to treat. So in the case of Joan and her son Bradley, they had such bad infestations that you couldn't cut them out because they were taking up so much of their pretty nasty. But yeah, I ended up treating them for a couple of months, soaking them in some really strong chemicals, and then gradually that kills the jiggers, and then the flesh just sort of flakes away, and the body eventually rebuilds and grows and sort of pushes them out. But and unfortunate, but ended up being really helpful side effect of that was I actually got the jiggers myself. So I had been to their house to help out.
So would you have caught it from them? Like, is it then contagious in that sense?
From their environment. So it was because I went into their house and foolishly I was in a rush and I didn't put closed-in shoes on, and so I'd walked around in their house trying to sort of help seal the floor, and then I just sort of felt something itchy in my foot the next day or the day after. And for me, it was a really interesting experience. It was like, oh my goodness, there's this creature like living in my foot.
Oh, I can experiment with treatments.
Exactly. Yep. And I know exactly what it feels like. And I was able to keep my feet sterile, so I could actually use a scalpel and cut them out, and then had them bandaged up. And that was actually the turning point. I was in a class, and one of the kids asked what had happened to me, and I just explained. I was like, oh, this is jiggers. And they were just absolutely shocked because they would never own that they had jiggers. And suddenly this Mzungu, like the white person who's, treated like a celebrity, was owning that she had them. And I then ended up telling every class I taught that day, hey, these are my feet, I've got jiggers. It's a thing that happens. It's a way to treat it. It's fine. And then the lineup that night at the first aid station, and all of these students who also had jiggers.
Right, but weren't admitting it.
Yeah.
Because there was a stigma.
There's a massive stigma. So I had never heard of it before, but then suddenly every second student's coming to me with their jiggers. So I think that was a nice little pivotal point of creating some change in that area.
That's a great story. So you talk about settling in to the school, and you tell a story of some of the students. You give some examples. You write about Eric, Caro and Mercy and their stories. Tell us a bit about those stories and what they mean to you as you reflect on them.
Yeah, I guess as a teacher, when you first walk into a class, they're just, a bunch of kids. And I guess initially when I started in Kenya, it was like a bunch of kids, and it's really hard to, even tell people apart, even, figure out who's who. A lot of the kids had shaved heads, so I would have to kind of check, like, are they wearing a skirt or are they wearing pants? Like, I'm not even sure if this is a guy or a girl. But after a few weeks of teaching, and once I knew more of their stories, it almost like hit me one of the days when I went in and I was just looking at the class and looking around at each of them, and I sort of saw Eric, and I'm like, he just seems like a smart kid, and he's top of every exam. But in the background, like, I know now that his mother had died when he was quite young, and he lives with a stepmother who doesn't like him and actually refuses to let him in the house. So essentially he doesn't live there. He stays at school all year round. So, when it's holidays, everyone else goes home, and you'll just sort of see Eric wandering the corridors. He bunks in with the boarders, even though he's not a boarder because he's not welcomed at home. And that's just one little story of one student, but every single student in the classroom has a story like that. One that was particularly grating for me was one of these students who just had this massive big grin, super friendly girl, and she had come after she did have a home to go back to, and after the holidays she'd come to me in the medical clinic area, and she'd been ploughing in the holidays, like, turning over the field using a hoe.
So like with a physical hoe?
Yeah, like quite a heavy physical hoe, and she was barefoot because she only had her school shoes and she wouldn't wear those in the field, and had just sent the hoe right.
Oh, dear.
Oh, so nasty.
Yeah.
And then because she didn't have access to medical services, she had, had become infected, and so she was hobbling around school. Like, each of those kids have got this big background of challenge and struggle, and yet they're so attentive and so keen, and they're ready to learn. I think it was once I knew those backstories, I was sort of like, wow, this is such a privilege. And it really motivated me to be like, I better make sure I am giving them this education that they really crave. Like, I am, they're all going through so much to be here. Yeah, makes you realise how privileged you are.
You talk about sport. You have an interesting story about AFL, but also running. I mean, when we think of Kenya and the sport, we always think of marathon runners, of course. So they're obviously a sporty people. They love their sport.
Yes, the sport was a big part of my time there. I was the girls' soccer coach, and I ran the running club, which, as you say, Kenyans love to run, and there's some really good runners. They don't all love to run, though. Some of the students, wouldn't have a bar of it, but the running club were very enthusiastic, and they would absolutely smoke me. Like, I enjoy running, but I'll go out for a run with them and they just take off, and then they're like, oh, I'm Tabby, and like slow down, and you can tell they're not even putting in any effort. It's like a slow walk. Someone's on Tabby duty.
Right. What about AFL? That sounds like an interesting story.
Yeah.
Australian rules football, for those who don't know what AFL is.
Yes, I had majored in PE, and so I was really excited to teach PE, but when I got there, it was a very small part of the curriculum, and I really wanted to give them exposure to, badminton and, some different sports that they hadn't tried. And when I was teaching, I taught them an AFL lesson, but it was during exam time. And so I had the kids out there playing this game, and they were really excited. I mean, AFL is hilarious with a group of novices, let alone a group of novice teenagers in full, suit and tie uniform. So it was a very lively game. And because the exams were going on, they have security at the exams. So, this guy comes out, the police officer, and he's got his big rifle, and he's telling me, you have to stop this. It's making too much noise. And I was like, but they're having so much fun. So I got all the kids in. I was like, we're going to keep going, but you just cannot make a sound. So, the police officer disappeared with his gun. I was like, we're going to get in big trouble if we make any noise. So you can just imagine, like, AFL's got an unusual shaped ball, and so it's unpredictable, and the ball's bouncing around, and the kids were literally putting their hands over their mouth trying to stop the laughter. Yeah, it was quite hilarious.
Great stories. One of the things, of course, would have been dealing with incredibly poor people, and then their understanding of wealth versus poverty. You talk about, I think one of the girls' name was Elise, and she was wondering why God doesn't love her, because I'm assuming because she wasn't wealthy. What's the relationship? How do people view wealth in Kenya, and how are the kids viewing wealth?
It's really interesting because if you have white skin, you are wealthy. So everyone, treats, would treat me like a millionaire, which, in comparison I am. And so you get treated differently. Everyone wants to be your best friend, and everyone wants to, show you a lot of respect and but also there's underneath this thing of is it because they want or not necessarily want, because they need support and they need some money and they know that I might be the one that can sort of do that. But one perspective which I've really appreciated and hadn't really thought about was that of like that young person who was saying to me, God loves white people more than black people. That was her words, because you're all wealthy and we're very poor.
Mm.
And then I remember one of the brothers doing a prayer, and he was like, we pray for our Western brothers and sisters who we know have jobs and who we know have money, and we pray that you'll give them pay rises, so that they can help. And I just thought, gosh, when I get a pay rise, I don't think, oh, this is God's answer to prayer of a Kenyan brother who's, struggling with malaria.
Mm.
Like, I don't think that's the first thing that comes to our mind in a Western setting. But it just opened my eyes a bit of, okay, like maybe that is how God's working. Maybe my position of privilege and wealth is to be able to help in this setting or another setting. Like, maybe it's not necessarily for everyone, it's Kenya, but are we really having awareness of our privilege and using it in the best ways?
Mm. We talk about Kenya as a whole. Is it Christian or is it sort of pagan? How would you describe the country sort of as a whole in general?
Yeah, as a whole, quite a religious country. So, yeah, a lot of Christians,
right.
Also sort of in the coastal region, quite a lot of Muslim faith.
Okay,
but yeah,
so a mixture of Muslim and Christian.
Yeah.
So that would mean there's at least some sort of ethic of honesty and that sort of thing which we would understand?
Yes, in theory, but then there's also reality.
Yeah.
And when your back's against the wall, things play out a bit differently.
Yeah, so I was wondering about that, theft and that sort of thing in the light of sort of an ethic.
Yeah, and that was something I wrestled with a bit, and I remember one of the students explaining it to me, like, because he was a brother, he was like a 17-year-old from the, local church, and I'd caught him actually stealing someone else's bowl. Like, they would get hot lunch served every day, and I saw him stealing someone else's bowl from their desk, and I pulled him aside and I was like, hey, what are you doing? Stealing's wrong.
Mm.
And he unpacked the logistics of it, and he was like, well, the food is really hot, and unless you have a bowl, you can't get food. Like, it's not something you can take in your hand. It's a boiling hot bean mix. He's like, I went to get my bowl and someone's stolen it. So I've got a choice of I take another bowl or I go home hungry. This is the only meal I'm going to get today.
Mm.
So what's the right thing to do?
Yeah.
It created a lot of ethical dilemmas in that sort of space, because you can see the practicalities, and it's almost like, oh, if the culture is, you take mine, I take yours, maybe there's a different ethic around what I think honesty is.
Yeah, yeah. Of course, one of the things we think about when we think about Africa is, and I have kind of no idea whether this applies to Kenya particularly, and that is the prevalence of AIDS. Was that something that you came across? Yeah,
it was actually. There was, thankfully, there's some really good AIDS medication now. So if someone receives, if they are HIV positive, they can access that medication, and it cannot, they can be in a situation where they're HIV positive their whole life, but it never actually develops into AIDS. So that was, for the majority of people that I came across that were in that situation, that was what it was. And sometimes it was just about helping them with, a bus fare so they can get to the clinic, so they can get the medication. There were a couple of situations where, they were very unwell. One particular situation of a lass down at the coast who both of her parents had died from AIDS, and she had actually made a decision she didn't want to keep living, and so she had stopped taking her medication.
Mm. And so these kids are generally picking up from their parents?
Yeah, it seemed to, my experience, my experience while I was there, every case that I saw was someone that had, got it from their parents.
That medication would be very expensive, I imagine. It might be a bit cheaper, obviously, in Africa than it is. It's very expensive in Australia, put it that way. So who's funding that?
I might be wrong on this, but I think it was the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation.
Oh, okay.
Had rolled out, the AIDS medication.
Yeah. Okay, yeah.
So it was, for the consumer it was free, yeah.
And then, of course, there's malaria. So malaria is everywhere. And, in fact, you got malaria.
Yes. Malaria was really common in the area that I was based in, but it became actually a frustration for me because anytime anyone was sick, they would say, I've got malaria.
Right.
I've got malaria. And, and it might just be a headache or, just about a stub toe they would call malaria. And that was frustrating for me because I was like, it might actually not be.
Because malaria is quite hard to definitively prognose, isn't it?
They have some really good little tests
do
now
they?
that you can. Yeah. So I was able to, I bought them, a large number of them so that I could just do that and test. And,
right.
and if people had malaria, put them on the medication. So, that was often part of what I would do when people were coming for first aid, just to check if that was the case. And, in one situation, I did try and do all the right things, and I slept under a mosquito net and, had long sleeves on at night and all of that sort of thing, because it's just the mosquitoes that come out at night time that are... So
it's that prevalent. You've got to be fastidious about even sleeping and that sort of thing to avoid it.
Yeah, so much so that now, even like 10 years later, if I hear a mosquito at night, I'll turn the light on and mosquito, because I'm like, that could kill me. Even though I know the ones in Australia don't carry malaria. But, I did actually get malaria while I was there. And thankfully I had some really good medication with me and was able to, take that and get on top of it pretty quick. But it is frightening, especially for young people, like babies and children. It can quite often be fatal. So,
Right. Does it have ongoing effects because you've had it? Or is it something you just get rid of and you're done?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of different types. So I've not experienced ongoing effects.
You described what you called the hungry season. What's that about?
Yeah, so a lot of people in Western Kenya are sort of subsistence farmers and their chief crop is maize, which they would make into like a maize flour and make a few different food items from that. But there's this issue that happens. It's a seasonal famine that happens basically every year. When it comes to the end, the fields are full of the crops of maize, but they're not yet ready for harvest. And they've run out of everything from the last harvest. And it's, around about a month or so of this awful time where everyone's really hungry, and it's known as the hungry season, and people are genuinely experiencing, quite a lot of hunger. And yet there's these fields of lush maize that it's not ready yet. It frustrates me because I tend to be quite an organised person and think, well, why don't we save some when we've got heaps and then use that when we're hungry? But the things you don't think of is like, how do you store a bulk amount of food when you live in a mud hut, when you don't have any, watertight storage containers sort of thing. And I remember one lady who had managed to store and keep a bunch of maize, and talking to her about it, and she said, well, as soon as the hungry season started, all my neighbours came and took it because they didn't have food. So, some frustrations and real amidst the real challenge.
What about safety? Did you feel safe over there, or were you sort of on the constant sort of surveillance and look out for danger?
I did mostly feel safe, but I have quite a high risk appetite. So there were times when it wasn't safe. Certainly because I was the only, the house that I was living in was the only, Westerners in the village or in the immediate sort of area. And that was a known thing. So I remember on one occasion there was an uproar in the village, and I think someone had actually gotten stoned, like they'd, picked up stones and someone was killed in the process of a dispute that had happened. And so the police were trying to sort that out, and I was told instantly, lock down your house, turn your lights off, lay low. And I was sort of like, well, I'm nothing to do with this. And then it was relayed to me, no, because the police are busy with that, people might try and target you and break in or, cause issues. So that was sort of like, okay, all the lights are off, and I'm like crawling around, below window height, trying not to be seen with my torch, which, I didn't have any major security issues or instances where I was personally threatened. But I think it was sort of in the background of, standing out as the white person and there's a associated level of risk with that.
And again, this is within sort of a smaller community. You wouldn't go wandering off in outback Kenya, I don't imagine, on your own.
Yeah, I wouldn't recommend it. And I would always, if I was going somewhere, even just taking a student with me who, maybe a couple of 15-year-olds, but a couple of 15-year-olds that speak the local language and Swahili really well and can help out if there's an issue.
Yeah. We've talked a little bit about the food. You talked about the hungry season. Mm-hmm. You actually started just eating some of their food for a little while. So obviously you were on a diet that was slightly better than the typical diet, but you chose to participate in their diet.
Yes, yeah. I mean, in the house I was living in, we did have access to some Western appliances, so we could have, toast, for example, or pasta. But yeah, I did do a week of eating with the students and just having what they were provided at the school. And it was, I'm glad I did. Like it taught me a lesson. I think I lost a couple of kilos that week, and the repetition of the food.
Yeah, so just the same thing day in, day. In fact, probably meal in, meal out.
Yeah, just like beans and maize and ugali, which is like maize flour made into sort of almost like a Play-Doh kind of consistency.
Sounds beautiful.
Yeah, I kind of semi-joked that it wasn't as yummy as Play-Doh, like because it was not quite as salty.
So are they healthy on this food? Is that enough?
Not really, no. So malnutrition is sort of across the board. There's not a lot of nutrition in what they eat, and the people where I was living tended to be quite lean and appeared quite healthy. But the time you would notice it was if there was ever a wound, or I would certainly notice it whenever anyone got some kind of wound, it just wouldn't heal.
Right. They must be getting fruit and vitamin C from somewhere.
There was...
Because wouldn't you get scurvy or something like that?
Yeah, there was occasional sort of seasonal things. So like avocados and mangoes would grow really well there. Yep. I actually had a massive avocado tree in my garden, which I loved. I love avocado. And then very sneakily, one of the Sunday mornings when I was at church, I came home and every single avocado was gone.
No. Yeah. Well, if you're eating maize and what was the other thing? The beans, then avocado would be just a delight, wouldn't it?
Yeah, just slicing some and into it and it gives you good fats and good. Yeah,
that'd be very tempting, I must say. If you were just eating beans, a bit of avocado would make the difference.
And the sneaky bit about that was I'd noticed some kids at the fence, and the kids had come with this tray of avocados, selling them for 10 shillings each. I was like, you sneaky little young kids.
They look very familiar.
Yes, yep. And I was like, of course I'm going to buy one back. I want an avocado. Very industrious.
Has it changed your shopping habits when you came back to Australia?
Yeah, it certainly, it was quite tricky coming back to Australia and being like, whoa, the amount I'm spending on a meal is a month's worth of education and food.
Yes, talk about that, because that's almost mind-bending, isn't it?
It is. I remember really clearly I came back to Adelaide and I went, there was like an end of year studies event on and there was like a cafe night, and I had used everything I had in Kenya. So my bank account, I literally had 40 cents in my bank account, and I was fine because I could live with family and whatever when I got back. But I remember going to this cafe night and looking at the menu, and they had on there, all the things available, and then you could get like a shot of caramel in your coffee or a shot of hazelnut, and that was 40 cents. And I was like, oh, can I just get the shot of and my sister Lily overheard me and was like, what? And then she's like, no, I'll get your food. That was just sort of in the very initial stages of transition back. But as well as, and it was, fine, I have good support and was able to get back on my feet pretty quick, but there is still that resistance of, it's not necessarily that I don't have the money, but I don't want to spend this much money on whatever this is.
Yeah, it's a real dilemma, isn't it? So a cup of coffee can buy so much for somebody else.
Yeah.
And what to do with that information and how to process that.
Yeah, it's a lot of processing, and I think it's something that you can continue to wrestle with throughout life. And I think that the place that I've kind of landed on is, am I living? It's more about living those values and doing the right thing. So if I'm turning into a really selfish person and spending a lot on myself, then that's not what I value. But if in an Australian setting, you have a coffee with someone and that's how you engage socially and that's how you build each other up and have those connections, then, maybe that's just a contextual thing and shifting your lens on it a little bit is helpful.
Did you ever really fit in over there?
I certainly had my place, but I learnt that I would never truly fit in. The differences between my upbringing and what was going on there was something that I could come to the point of recognizing that, but I would never pretend to truly understand what that's like to grow up in extreme poverty or in that sort of situation. And so I came to a realization of, yes, I can do a lot of help and make some change here, but I will never truly fit in or truly belong.
Mm. We mentioned at the beginning that you were baptised into Christ. The gospel message is obviously a priority. Mm-hmm. How do you sort of marry the service that you're doing, the good you're bringing, charity, let's call it the charity work you're doing, mm-hmm. With the gospel message or the proclamation of the gospel message? How do they fit together for you? For
me, it's like it's very linked. I don't know if you've ever seen the Poverty and Justice Bible. It's a version of the Bible that they've highlighted every reference where it talks about poverty or a sense of justice. And you can flick through it and you just see that it's highlighted all the way through. For me, that is what the message of living like Christ and being a disciple is. To be able to look after the fatherless and the widows and that sort of, those sort of messages that are consistent throughout the Bible. I think for me it's a real clear, if you believe this, then you do this. But I think over time my understanding of the world and my perspective of what that looks like has broadened and probably become richer, and I've been able to see that, hey, that living a life of service can look really different in different contexts, and it can be lived out wherever you are in the world.
Mm. And is there more to this than just giving money? I mean, Absolutely. Is giving money always the answer?
Giving money is helpful, but it's not always the answer. And that was actually, one of my realizations when I came back, and I spent a fair bit of time going back and forth between Kenya and India and Vanuatu and a few other countries doing this kind of work for about 5 or 6 years. And then we had COVID sort of hit the world and everything changed for everyone. And I found myself back in an Australian context, and I was sort of thinking, well, now what? Like, what does this look like here? And, doing a bit of a dive, it's like, okay, I was working with extreme poverty with, basic needs of food and shelter. But in the context I am in now, there's a different sort of poverty. And what became apparent to me was the poverty of connection that I saw in an Australian setting, and the struggles that people had here were just, the same level of struggle as someone might have in Kenya, but it's just happening in a different realm in their life. Mm.
Yeah, that's powerful. Mm. Well, the time came for you to say goodbye and leave. What was that like after being there for so long and building, I imagine, amazing relationships, and then you're saying goodbye potentially forever? I mean, you might drop back in, but you're really leaving them. Mm. You've done all this work and now you're leaving. What's that like?
It was very confusing, actually. It was I felt torn between, like, am I doing good here, like, and this is my life mission and I need to live here forever, or is it a case of, I've done my bit in this corner of the world and I'm done. And I think that's probably one of the reasons why it took me so long to pull together the book, because I wasn't sure what the ending meant. And, I did leave and come back to Australia, but then, over the next 5 years I was back and forth. So I think that kind of helped in a way. I was able to sort of pivot and shift what I was doing and help out on different projects in different ways. So it wasn't like a cold, hard, I'm here and I'm gone. It was like, I'll come back, and I came back in a different capacity and did some different things. And so I think by the time, we kind of had gotten to 2019, 2020, and I was sort of stopping going back for long stints, I guess sped up by COVID, I felt calm about that, and I could see there's other contexts that I can work in. And there is still ways to maintain those relationships. I mean, still today, 10 years later, I get messages from Kenyans every week, checking in and having a chat. So
that's nice.
Yeah.
All of this was done under the charity Agape in Action. Just tell us a little bit about that and how that works.
Yeah, so Agape in Action is a really cool charity that's it's Canadian, Australian and American, so registered in all of those places. And it works with people in situations of extreme poverty. but it has a 100% to the field model. So there's a separate pool of funding that covers administration things. So if, the average person wants to contribute, they can know that their money is going straight to the field, straight to these projects, which we've been talking about, the education and the health and the nutrition and lots of different programs that are designed, very much with the people, with the locals that are on the ground, and administered by them. So it's not that sort of white saviour coming in and fixing the problems. It's very much working with the people on the ground to sort of create that lasting change.
So the goal is to build local resilience and I guess the old adage, teach a man to fish sort of thing. Yeah,
and it is very much based on the principles of love does, like agape in action, love in action, and it being an active thing, not just something that we think about. And all of the projects are in conjunction with the Christadelphian ecclesias over there, so different brothers and sisters managing.
If people want to get involved, how can they find out about it?
Going to the website, Agape in Action is the best place, and there's lots of different ways to get involved. Like you can sponsor, or you can hold a fundraiser. One of my favourite things, which is just a really good instant thing you can do, is we have a Gifts of Hope section on the website where you can buy a goat or buy a school book or something, which I actually love giving that as gifts to someone. Like when it's their birthday or there's some event, you give them this you get a nice little printout card which says you bought a goat, and it's kind of this lovely way of doing good on behalf of someone else, not necessarily with their consent, but it's a really lovely way to give.
And it's not just a gimmick, you actually do buy a goat?
Yes, you actually do, yep. And I particularly love the goat one because I was involved in some of the goat distributions. That's really life-changing. Goats are amazing.
Yes.
So, it is giving a physical gift, yeah.
Well, these years on, what's Tabby doing today?
So I live in Adelaide at the moment, and I work. I ended up going back to uni again and studying counselling and psychotherapy. So I found that was a need I was seeing a lot of in an Australian context. And so I've worked in adventure therapy for 5 years with teenagers who have complex challenges. And at the moment, I volunteer at Lifeline. So doing crisis support for people who might be experiencing thoughts of suicide or in the act of. And I also do outreach work with teenagers who might have attempted suicide. So I've moved into more of the mental health space, but very much working with NGOs and charities, seeking to sort of still live out those same principles of how can you serve the people around you, but certainly with a lot to learn. I think we all have a lot to learn and can always improve in a lot of ways.
What would be a final message or a final learning from you that you can share with us?
I think that the key thing that has come out of this for me is the most important thing is to truly live your values. And that might start with clarifying what your values are. And, if I say I believe this and I want to live this way, am I actually doing that or do I need to tweak some things? And I see that as a really exciting process of, okay, here's some things that don't align with what I say I believe and how I want to live. And here's some things that do, and how can I boost these in my life and make the biggest difference? And I think it's a real privilege to sort of be a light or be, if you view it in that way, that's how God works in our world today, is through us. So what a privilege to be able to be that to someone else, however you can.
Tabby, thanks very much for joining Wilderness Conversations.
My pleasure. Thanks so much.